Welcome back everyone to the VMP Performance YouTube channel. I'm Justin and this is our VMP Gen3 supercharger for the 0304 Cobra, also known as the Terminator. So, why do we have an aftermarket supercharger for the 0304 Cobra? Well, to make more horsepower, of course. And we have been making more horsepower on that platform for years now, since the introduction of our original supercharger for the 0304 Cobra back in 2010. When the 2.65 liter Eaton rotors became available, we started using them on GT500s and Coyotes. Once we saw the results from them, we knew we had to get them in the Cobra platform. So we went and redesigned our supercharger with an all-new case and now an all-new inlet elbow and all-new cold air to allow for a direct bolt-on 2.65 liter TVS based supercharger for the Terminator. We've actually had the supercharger out in the market for about 6 months now, and to fully round out the package, we wanted to optimize and refine a couple other aspects. Things that we'd always seen over the years, but we had left alone because honestly the 2.3 liter just didn't need it. It didn't move enough air. It was a great supercharger, but the 265 has so much more potential. We wanted to make sure that the full package was optimized. So today, I'm going to review the whole package with you, show you some of the updates we've made, show you some of the new parts we've come out with, and hopefully answer as many questions as possible about what it is like to swap the supercharger onto your Cobra. One of the big changes that we just made is the revised high flow inlet elbow. This is actually an all-new casting, and it is CNC matched to the inlet of the supercharger. If you installed one of our old 2.3 liter TVS based superchargers, you would have had an O-ring that goes between the elbow and the supercharger. We got rid of the O-ring, replaced it with a gasket, and made the opening much larger. We wanted to make sure that the 2.65 liter rotors were fed with as much air as possible. Now, this elbow has a couple other unique features that I want to show you. Mainly, we eliminated some dents and some little restrictions inside the elbow. Our original elbow had clearance for the factory fuel rail. And you see this dinky little thing right here? Most of you aren't running this on your Cobra, especially when you are running a supercharger of this caliber. So we decided that it would be better to just get that extra airflow volume inside this elbow. And if you do happen to still have the factory fuel rail, when you go to install your Gen 3, just take a crescent wrench like this and tweak this fuel rail over. About like that. And that's going to give the elbow and the fuel rail clearance. Now, if you're running aftermarket fuel rails, you don't even need to worry about this. And like I said, with the power level this supercharger is capable of, and with what we're seeing people wanting to make, most of you aren't even running factory fuel rails anymore, so it's not even a concern. If you are running aftermarket fuel rails, we recommend the 4 rails. They fit the best with the VMP Gen 3. Now, as far as the elbow goes, it still has all of the same features and benefits as our previous generation elbows. We still offer 3 different bolt patterns. One for our big GT500 style single blade throttle body. Let me hold that the right way. And one for the stock throttle body, and one for the AccuFab and LFP style throttle body, which is a smaller single blade throttle body. If you keep hearing me say single blade throttle body over and over again, that's because it's pretty much what you want for your 03 Cobra. That's what you need to get as much air as possible into the supercharger. It's worth noting, we supply a gasket for the throttle body. In this case, you're only going to get the gasket if you purchase the throttle body from us. If you're using a stock or an AccuFab throttle body, you'll want to use the gasket that came with it. This right here is where the idle air control valve mounts. The canister portion and the connector portion, you want to have it facing that direction. Otherwise, it makes a really weird humming noise when you start the car up for the first time, and it'll probably scare you a little bit. That's really all there is to the elbow. Since we're on the topic of throttle bodies, I want to talk to you a little bit about the linkage. Our supercharger is designed to take a factory throttle cable linkage bracket, basically like this one right here. We supply 2 stainless Allen head bolts to replace the factory zinc colored bolts that are probably kind of ugly by now. And your throttle cable passes through here, locks in. Your cruise control cable passes through here, locks in. What we found out is that if you're coming over from a competitor supercharger, they do not use the factory bracket, and you probably don't have it anymore. So we do offer these for sale separately in the event you need one. They're kind of pricey, unfortunately, because Ford doesn't make them anymore, and we had to tool a bunch of them specifically for this reason. But they are available, and hopefully you still have your stock one. Couple other little installation considerations related to the elbow, since we're on the topic and I'm telling you where all the connections go. This right here is for the canister purge line that comes out of the passenger side fender well. It's usually a black line that leaves a bunch of black stuff on your hand. And we do have the bottom here slotted, so these bottom bolts are kind of hard to get to, especially if you have an aftermarket fuel rail. So what you end up doing is screwing them in partially right here. I just did this last week on a car, so I can pretty much show you how it's done right up here on the table. Make sure you throw the gasket on first. Slide the elbow on. All right. Now you're going to want to have one of these, a 5mm ball drive 3/8 driver. And you can sneak under here. Of course, with the ratchet on the end, tighten it up. Come around the back, go over here, put your top bolts in, and tighten them down. Ooh, looks pretty good. A little bit later, I'll have them take a close-up of inside the supercharger, and we'll cut that into the video, and you can actually see the CNC port matching that I was talking about earlier. So, since I went ahead and opened up the hardware kit that comes with every VMP Gen3 supercharger, I want to show you all the different bolts we include and kind of some installation specifics that you'll want to be aware of. First things first, this bolt on the front here is kind of a pain in the butt to get to. It was like this with our older supercharger. The 2.65 liter TVS is so much wider that we decided to include Allen head bolts of the correct length to bolt it down. It just makes for a much nicer look, and it's pretty much required for installation. The factory bolts are too long and the heads are too big. We recommend you have a 6mm extended reach ball drive Allen key to go in here and access these. You're going to want to torque them down to about 20 to 30 foot-pounds. You're also going to want to reuse the factory stamped steel gasket. You don't want to put any sealants or RTV on it or anything. It's meant to just sandwich between the lower intake and the supercharger and seal simply based on the torque of the bolts. So that's one important installation consideration that I wanted to cover with you. And a couple other things. I'll put these all here so they have a place. We include new bolts for the TMap sensor. And the TMap sensor goes on the back of the supercharger. Similar location to your factory supercharger, just moved over slightly. This basically picks up both pressure inside the lower intake manifold and temperature. So that's used for aspects of the tune like returnless fuel calculations and also spark calculations based on downstream air temp. Very important sensor. I've heard that Ford does not make them or sell them anymore, so they're kind of hard to find. But we include new bolts, correct length. These are M4.7, they're really tiny. And we do have a recess for the connector on the latest VMP Gen3, so there's no need for a spacer, there's no need for washers. The housing is actually machined with a recess. That brings us to the next topic, EGR. We have an EGR provision on VMP Gen3 superchargers. Something that we do that makes the EGR a little bit easier to install is provide studs. So when you're installing it, this is kind of a tricky part that I want to talk about, and I just kind of want you to visualize. Whenever you're installing EGR on an aftermarket supercharger, you want to leave everything kind of hooked up but loose. When I say everything, I mean the EGR tube where it connects to the header and where it connects to the valve, because if you bolt the valve down, bolt the supercharger down, and then try to line up the tube, you'll probably never get it. So you actually want to leave it loose, get the supercharger butted up, and kind of tighten everything one step at a time, really in small steps each time, to cinch it all down and get it into place. And that's going to keep you from having to fight with either forcing regular bolts in here or trying to line up the EGR tube into the valve. It's simply the easiest way to do it. Maybe we'll detail it a little bit more in a future installation video, but that is why we have studs, so you can slide the supercharger in there, catch the EGR valve, throw these nuts on it, and just progressively tighten everything down and suck everything in. And this is all important because we did not want the EGR interfering with the internal volume of our inlet, so we actually push it back. So you're definitely fighting with it because it's not in the location that it originally was in. I think I've covered most of the installation considerations up here. We're going to go into some more, but first let me touch on the 3 vacuum lines connections. Our instructions talk a lot about these. This is for the PCV system if you still have it. This is for boost reference, for like your fuel rail pressure sensor, your boost gauge. This is for vacuum reference. These are actually all in the factory location on our supercharger, so all of your factory lines plug right in. Now we're going to talk about the infamous coolant crossover. So when we came out with the supercharger, we knew there were going to have to be some modifications to install it. It is just way too freaking wide. When Ford designed the 03 Cobra, I don't think they ever imagined that there was going to be a 2.3 liter and then a 2.65 liter supercharger available for it. The coolant crossover is just in the way of the supercharger rotor plate. And the best way to deal with it is to clearance it with our buddy over there, Thor's hammer. So the actual amount of clearancing is pretty minimal. We have another installation video that shows some techniques and some methods to get that done. Because you are going to be taking off the coolant crossover and reinstalling it, we provide you with 4 new O-rings because everybody hates coolant leaks. That's the best way I can explain it. You just need to modify the coolant crossover. Once you've done it, it's really not that big of a deal. Here is why we designed the supercharger this way. We had a choice to either go up, potentially interfere with hood clearance, both here and at the pulley. We had a choice to go back and reduce the inlet volume. We did not think that our customers wanted reduced performance over something as simple as this. We did not think they wanted to do an aftermarket hood, so this is the least of the evils. And people have said, well, why didn't you just make the supercharger different? Well, the width of the Eaton 2.65 liter TVS rotors and the rotor plate that they're mounted to is pretty much fixed. There's just not a whole lot we can do about it. All right, now that we've gotten Thor's hammer out of the way, let's keep talking about some of the other parts and features of the VMP kit. We do have an EGR plate in case your engine does not have this. It has an O-ring seal. If you are reusing the factory EGR valve, make sure you use the gasket off of it as well, or get a new one. I mentioned earlier that we include all new hardware. This is the intercooler bolt hardware kit. 03 Cobras are very well known for having the intercooler bolts break off when you're removing them. So we just supply you with a new set of M5 bolts. They are grade 10.9. You want to use a little bit of the supplied Loctite on them so they do not fall off inside the lower intake and go into your engine. That is a very bad day, as Joe would say. Like I said earlier, everybody hates coolant leaks, so we supply new O-rings for the coolant transfer tubes that go in the intercooler right below the supercharger. We supply new pulley bolts. Now we are going to go into supercharger pulleys. All of VMP's superchargers use a 6-bolt quick change pulley design. They all use a stainless steel hub. The pulleys for the 0304 Cobra are unique because of the offset and the number of ribs. 03 Cobras are 8 rib on the supercharger belt. You can see these guys go on and off very easily. You line them up, you bolt them down, and you let her rip. These are stainless steel Allen head bolts, so you don't want to put too much torque into them. I personally like to use a 1/4 inch cordless impact, and that has just enough torque that when I hear it bogging down, I let off the trigger and I know they're tight. You don't want to strip these out and potentially strip out the heads or break one off. You also don't want to have them too loose because the pulley will actually start walking, making a really weird noise, and then it'll come loose completely and destroy itself, and it's a bad day. Seen that happen. So make sure you get your pulley bolts tight, not too tight because you still want to be able to get them off. We have pulley sizes ranging from 2.6 inch up to 3.3 inch. Most people putting this supercharger on a stock 0304 Cobra on pump gas are going to want to run around 18 to 19 PSI. So you're going to want to stay in the 3.3 to 3.2 inch pulley range if you're at sea level. You could get a little more aggressive with 3.1. If you're running the very common 4-pound overdrive lower, you're going to want to run probably between a 3.3 to a 3.0. At the point that you have an overdrive lower, I know that you've usually converted to an E85 fuel system or you're running race gas, so boost really isn't an issue. We've got a lot of different pulley sizes to support whatever amount of boost you ultimately want to run. We've got a pulley size guide on our website, and you can always call in and ask us what our recommendation is. So, the last and final part of this video is going to be talking about the 5-inch cold air system that we came out with specifically to feed the VMP Gen3 supercharger. Cobras have always kind of been limited by their small engine bay. The strut tower is right about here, right next to the throttle body and the inlets. So there's just not a lot of room to work with. We made this tube out of multiply wire reinforced silicone because we basically knew that engine bay was really tight. We didn't want to have anything hit the hood. We didn't want to have something rattle on the valve cover or the strut tower. This tube's silicone, so there's no rattling to occur. And we match it up specifically to the size of the VMP single blade throttle body. So we supply clamps for either end, and then we set you up with this big PMAS 120 millimeter housing and slot style sensor. This is really important because it's also 5 inches. So you basically have a true 5-inch from the filter to the MAF to the throttle body and into the supercharger for maximum possible flow. We supply you with an adapter harness, plug and play adapter harness. These sensors tune very, very easily in these big mass air housings. We can actually supply your tuner with a transfer function that is based on our own dyno tuning experience. This is just really the way to go for these older cars, is to go to the slot style mass air, go to the bigger housing. Previously, we had 100mm housing and a VMP 3500 sensor. That used to be our recommended combination. Now that we've gone to a bigger housing, the stock sensor has enough range. Everything matches up size-wise. I just prefer this much more going forward for the big horsepower builds, you know, anything that's 650, 700 rear wheel horsepower or more. It looks good, it tunes easily, it flows well. If you have an older setup like one of our 2.3 liter TVS superchargers, you can purchase this 5-inch cold air kit and use it on those as well. You don't just have to have a Gen 3. Thanks for watching this product overview video of the VMP Gen 3 for 0304 Cobras. If you have any questions, post them in the comments below or reach out to us. You can find links to these products on our website in the description below. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share the VMP Performance YouTube channel to see more videos like this one.